All right, welcome everyone to our first locally of the term. My name is Alan Wigg. For those of you who don't know me, I'm new faculty here in geography. So thank you all for coming. I wanted to welcome our guest speaker, Sajani Kandel, recently graduated from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where we worked together for many years. She wasn't able to come in person because she's in the process of starting a new PhD at the university, a postdoc, a new position at University of Minnesota. So Sajani was born and raised in Nepal, did her undergraduate and her first master's in Nepal, and then came to Boston for a master's of urban planning, and then transitioned into the PhD in environmental science, where she centered her research around the stuff she's going to talk about today, climate change resiliency planning, specifically focusing on extreme heat research in marginalized communities. Something that we're both very proud of that she and I worked on last summer, 2 summers ago, and this past summer was a summer program in urban planning that worked in Boston to introduce youth of color to the principles and practices of contemporary urban planning through active engagement in research. Focusing on her work, her research on extreme heat as the way to teach her participatory and engaged planning strategies to the communities of color. And so she's in the process of starting a postdoctoral fellowship at University of Minnesota Institute of the Environment as a joint fellow in a project that seeks to increase access to federal climate change data products to tribal communities and the workforce development of sustainable data science research projects. I wanted to bring her because I saw, as I think we'll see today, her work very much aligns to the vast majority of topics that we have going on in our department, and of course elsewhere at University of Florida. And so I'll maybe leave it at that and turn it over to Sajani.
Thank you, Dr. Wigg. Thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me today. I'm really excited to be here. So today I'll be talking about, like Dr. Wigg mentioned, I'll be talking about 2 extreme heat research I worked during my PhD program in UMass Boston. So briefly about background, I'll just touch background of my research goal, and I will directly jump into introducing this 2 community-based extreme project that I've been working for a while now, and then maybe talk briefly about the major finding and where we are at in terms of research and where we are moving forward, and then maybe open up for the question and answer session. My talk will be approximately 30 to 45 minutes, and hopefully we'll have 20 more minutes to talk about questions, comments, and feedback. So we all observed and to some extent experienced how brutal this summer was. Heat was all over the news. We saw dramatic increase in heat-related deaths this past summer. And if we talk about United States, 40% of population was under some kind of heat advisory in United States. And as we are talking here today, many regions across the US are facing extreme heat events. Extreme heat impacts every region, everyone. However, some individuals and communities are more vulnerable than others, like poor, racial minorities, elderly, infants, women, unsettled residents, etc. The list goes on, and I've listed many of those groups here. For example, last year in Europe, where more than 61,000 excess deaths happened during the extreme heat events, elderly and women had higher deaths compared to other population groups. And in Asia this past year, we see dramatic increase in elderly, homeless folks, and outdoor workers deaths. In the context of United States, extreme heat is problematic because it is #1 killer in comparison to other disasters, and it kills more than 700 individuals every year. Though heat is #1 killer here in the United States, in terms of if we look into the excess death that happens during the extreme heat events, US is comparatively, death that happens in US is still comparatively lower than the other region. And the experts believe that it might be due to underreported deaths. And even this 700 number that I've just talked about, many scholars believe that it's highly underreported. And many other scholars believe that the death we have during the major heat events is comparatively lower because this high prevalence of AC in the United States compared to other European regions and also like other part of the globe in general. Extreme heat is becoming more problematic now, mainly because of how climate change is amplifying its intensity and frequency, and also its intersection with our aging population, poverty and urbanization, and because of which urban heat island effect happens. And that's why heat is like now emerging to be most concerning disaster. Though we have recently talking a lot about heat, and I don't know how much you are following like scholarship in planning, climate science and environment science, and also in our popular media, but heat is not a new phenomenon. We all know that our cities and communities have been facing heat for many, many years. And we have been looking heat as a mainly public health issue. And this is the reason why planning response for heat has been mainly led by public health agency for many years. And it's really interesting for me because coming from a planning and sort of like interdisciplinary background of planning and environment science, like when I started tracing the history of heat, heat actually can be categorized as one of the older planning response that dates back to 1970s when it was first categorized as a natural hazard, and even further back in 1919 when New York City issued its first heat advisory during a heat wave that killed more than 300 residents. If we just look into reflect into the recent events like maybe 1995 Chicago heat wave and 2003 European heat wave that killed more than 770,000 people respectively, was this instrumental, disaster, not instrumental, but like was a really important timeline where the way heat was seen, the way our cities started to look at the heat, the approach kind of shifted, and we started seeing heat action plan as a very instrumental in responding and managing heat. However, in practice, still today, city planning agency never really played a very significant role. And like I mentioned, it's mainly because heat was primarily seen as a public health issue. And because of these reasons, heat planning scholarship is still relatively new. It's a silent disaster, and because it does not provide that visual destruction like many other disaster does, and mainly impacts invisible population like racial minorities, elderly, homeless population, outdoor workers, and many more. And this is the reason why in practice, very few institution has formally and comprehensively managed heat, and FEMA still does not recognize heat as a disaster. And because of all of these reasons in scholarship and also in municipal level assessment, there has been very limited attempt to understand what communities are going through at the ground level, meaning the experience of low-income residents mainly living in urban heat island. This has been largely overlooked, and because of this, this theory of adaptive capacity, which I'll explain a bit more, has been largely underdeveloped. So mainly like in heat assessment, in both scholarship and municipal assessment, we have been using this framework, which combines these three factors, exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Briefly defining these, exposure is the extent to which a system or the elements of system is being directly or indirectly impacted. Sensitivity is the degree to which exposed population reacts. And both of these indicators, mainly in the case of heat, has made big advancement recently with novel methods to model urban heat and its indicators. However, the adaptive capacity, which is defined as population ability to handle the exposure, and which includes like residents' experience, their knowledge, their coping ability, has been largely ignored, and thus there is like this big research gap or understanding of how differential adaptive capacity impacts residents' heat vulnerability and how that can be modeled into this framework to understand heat vulnerability and resiliency of the communities. So to address these gaps, I've involved in this two community-based extreme heat research for the last 5 years. The first one is this community-based project which investigates lived experience of low-income elderly of color and their heat adaptation, preference, and priorities in the largest neighborhood and environment justice community in Dorchester, Boston. And then I extended this research in this summer program in urban planning, which Dr. Wig talked about. And I work with Dr. Wig, who was a faculty director of this project in partnership with urban planning and community development at UMass Boston and Boston Planning and Development Agency and Boston Public School. So basically in this program, we work with 15 youth of color who studied nature extent and of the urban heat in another environment justice community called Roxbury, which is the historic Black neighborhood. And I'll talk about both of these projects one by one. So the research goal, the overarching research goal was first to engage low-income residents of color in as a major stakeholder, and I like to say them as a context expert in our heat vulnerability assessment, and then identifying their self-assess heat impacts and adaptive capacity and document their heat adaptation and mitigation priorities and preferences. And finally, investigating how can this residents generated data can be incorporated into Boston Heat Action Plan, which has been recently developed and which is in the process of implementing some of the heat adaptation and mitigation strategies this summer. So both of this research has been guided by this framework of environment and climate justice scholarship with critical theory of intersectionality, and which recognizes and values diverse voice, values, experiences of climate or environment justice population. And the reason I use this framework was that this framework acknowledges that there is contextual, historical, racial, social, economic, and multiple oppressive factors that drives inequality to heat exposure and access to resources for heat adaptation and mitigation, and thus making some individuals and communities more vulnerable to heat. And one of the examples of this is previously redlined communities, which is still home to large racial and ethnic minorities who now have 4 to 10 degrees higher temperature compared to non-redlined neighborhood. Both of this research is based in city of Boston, which is facing increasing extreme heat concern. City of Boston have already surpassed extreme heat projection of getting 20 to 40 days of getting 90 degree and higher temperature by 2030. We are already above that. We are already getting, I think, more than 30 days of 90 degree Fahrenheit. Entire Boston is urban heat island, meaning there are some neighborhood who have temperature difference up to 10 degree Fahrenheit or higher temperature than 10 degree Fahrenheit to other surrounding greener neighborhood or semi-urban or rural neighborhood, mainly because Boston has high built area, higher population density, and have large heat trapping surfaces and not enough green spaces and tree canopies that can provide cooling effect. City have large environment justice population. 5 neighborhood in Boston is environment justice population, and Dorchester and Roxbury are the 2 neighborhood that we've worked. City has high racial, wealth, and power disparities and inequitable access to resources like green spaces that provides ecological benefit to mitigate heat. This map was published by City of Boston, which directly relates how lack of green spaces or tree canopies to high temperature distribution and duration. And one thing to keep in mind when we are looking at this map is kind of like, it does not portray true picture. The blue areas in the upper map does not mean that those areas are cool. It's just a comparative assessment. Okay, red and yellow are super hot, and to provide that contrast feature, they have used this blue color. This does not mean that those areas are super cool. No, those areas are hot as well. Like I mentioned, entire Boston is urban heat island, includes the areas which are blue in color. Though Boston is a global leader in climate change assessment nationally and internationally, in terms of extreme heat, very little attention has been given until recently, where City of Boston has published like heat resiliency study and solution, and now they are implementing some of the strategies across the environment justice community. So sort of like reflecting on Boston heat planning landscape and to talk about like how and when Boston started thinking about heat. Boston heat planning landscape can be considered to be really unique, mainly because it is one of the proactive cities in the United States, and I think in entire globe, to kick off its resiliency planning back in 2007, which was followed by 2011 Climate Action Plan, and it was the first plan to officially address heat mitigation. However, like I mentioned earlier, heat was primarily seen as a public health issue. That's the reason why public health agencies were taking lead in the issues related to heat, and which some scholars believe that is a reactive approach, and there was no involvement of planning agencies in heat response and management. And for Boston, this is also true because a Boston Planning Agency, which is Boston Planning and Development Agency, works both like it's a quasi-city agency, and it works both like a planning agency but also like a developer. So they really didn't have like much to offer for heat planning at the earlier stage. Boston proactiveness in the climate change domain, including heat, has also been like shaped by this major disaster that is happening around the world. And if we look into the heat planning, mainly 2003 European heat wave and 2006 Northeast heat wave was instrumental to make sure that heat is included in 2011 Climate Action Plan for the very first time. But when Sandy hit Northeast, the approach sort of like shifted towards sea level rise and stormwater and coastal flooding, and heat never got really an opportunity to come in the front of mainstream planning, even though Climatary Boston, which is a guiding document for climate change in Boston, talked about heat in much greater extent in 2016. Like we never had any comprehensive planning or any sort of plan that talked about heat in a much deeper level. However, Boston being this academic hub and being a hub of expertise in different disciplines, that played a very crucial role in advancing climate resiliency planning, including heat. And our own university, UMass Boston, played a very big role in climate change assessment and projection. And now we have this coalition of scientists across Greater Boston area called GBRAC, which is providing relevant climate change data and indicators, including heat. There has been also this consistent political support to advance climate change planning in Boston. For example, Mayor Menino kicked off climate change planning back in 2007, which was continued by Mayor Walsh. And that is the time where Climatary Boston was published, including Imagine Boston, which is a comprehensive plan in 50 years. Though this period was criticized for being highly inclined toward private property protection, the in-depth distributional understanding of heat assessment was done in the later part of his mayor time, which was then continued by current mayor, Mayor Wu, who has been examining or leading the effort to examine the distributional impact of heat in environmental justice communities in Boston. So now moving towards a specific research project, which I'm here to talk about today. So the first research project was based in Dorchester, Boston, which is the largest neighborhood in Boston, and is an environment justice community. And this community-based research this community-based research tries to understand lived experience of heat and residents' heat adaptation and mitigation preference. And for this, I partnered with Caribbean Foundation of Boston, which is a nonprofit working to expand home care for their culturally diverse and economically disadvantaged community. My population of interest was elderly Caribbean women living in Dorchester. And mainly because this population group is largest in the Dorchester. 40% of total Caribbean residents lives in 40% of Caribbean residents in Boston lives in Dorchester. They are from different countries of origin, Jamaica, Haiti, and from the Spanish-speaking countries like Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. They face severe challenges like higher poverty rate, and Dorchester is one of the neighborhoods which has highest poverty rate in Boston, and has huge wealth gap and disparities, and is facing severe housing challenges. So when I partnered with Caribbean Foundation of Boston, the home health aide of the organization, who are the staff members and who are primarily Caribbean women, were interviewed during the initial part of the study. And they later helped me to connect with other Caribbean women, mainly elderly women, via informal conversation, and which was followed by semi-structured interviews. And in total, I did 31 interviews, and more than 80% of my participants were elderly, and remaining were from different age brackets. And mainly they were from Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Haiti, and few were from Puerto Rico. And then talking about the findings, heat is definitely a lethal problem for these Caribbean women. And this was mainly due to the fact that how old houses in the Boston are designed, because these old houses are geared towards keeping cold out and heat in, and thus trapping more heat and making indoor heat exposure much more worse. The housing design also do not allow air movement. There is no natural ventilation at all. And interestingly, like majority of my participants were living in the top floor, and being in the top floor means these apartments or these units are always hotter during the summer month, and it does not have to be heat wave. And to make the matter worse, these houses are in the street where there is little to no trees, and Dorchester particularly is one of the neighborhoods which have lowest tree canopy among other environment, even if you compare to other environment justice communities in Boston. So basically these apartments were almost unlivable during the high temperature days. Many of these buildings also didn't have elevator or comfortable stairs for mobility. So literally these elderlies were trapped inside, to no access to the outer world. Forget about cooling, forget about other stuff. For the basic necessities also, they couldn't go out. Almost all of the interviews have some kind of AC. 80% of Boston population, I think, if I remember, more than 80% of population have some kind of AC, and this small window AC is most popular in Boston. But when you are living in the top floor where your apartment is already overbaked during the summertime, it's not enough to cool down the area. So one of my participants said, I live in the third floor of the triple decker. It's always overheated, even when it's not hot outside. I have a window unit, but it's not enough to cool down the whole place. This small AC does not help. Even using it for hours, my place feels the same. As they have to use AC for a really long time, they struggle with electricity cost. Energy cost has gone up to 25% in the last 3 years nationally, and there are like different data that's going around. So some of the data do say is that it's more than 25% increase in the energy cost already nationally. So residents struggle with that. So often they have to make trade-off whether to spend in cooling or whether to spend in their other necessities. And most of my interviews are immigrant women, and they still have to send money back home where their family largely relies on them for income and for other basic necessities. So one of my participants said, my family is still in Jamaica. I try to send them money every month. There are some months when I'm short in cash myself. So I try to save as much as I can. Can't afford the higher electricity charges, so I avoid using my cooler. These are elderly women, but still they are backbone of their family back home. So they often have to, sort of like make a trade-off whether to spend money here, whether to spend money on my needs, or whether to spend money back home. And with electricity charge, it's hard for them. Their support system, friends and family that they used to know before, and all the community service providers are now being displaced by high living cost in the area. Boston is really expensive city in terms of housing. All of these communities are getting gentrified and people are getting displaced. So all the support system that residents had in place are no longer there. There are some service and resources being provided by City of Boston, like, cooling center, providing subsidy to support electricity cost. But sadly, residents are not aware about any of these resources. And this is not only true for residents, these are also true for some of the community leader that I interviewed during the process, and which portrays severe communication gap between city and the intermediary institution working with the communities. And these intermediary institutions were supposed to be this bridge between city and the community, right? So, but they don't have much idea about these resources that are in the place. So then after documenting lived experience, I try to understand what are heat adaptation preference and priorities. And for that, I again interviewed same residents using a method called value-focused thinking, which is this roots in decision science. And the method enables participants to model or map their concern or thing that they want to change. Traditionally, in decision science, this method is done with experts, but here I have used this method with residents because my research believes that residents are context expert due to their lived experience and values they can offer for better insight in decision problem of this study. So residents identified maximizing thermal comfort, minimizing isolation among older adults, and maximizing information and awareness as a major objective they want to meet to increase their heat resiliency. The objectives are structured to create a fundamental value hierarchy, which you can see here in the slide, which sort of like logically decomposes these values from most general to specific, most general being the objective they want to meet. And as the diagram flows towards the right direction, the objective becomes more specific and will end when the planning actions are identified. This diagram is fairly extended and I cannot fit it here. So today I'll just focus on two objectives and few decision action. So let's start with the first one. So maximizing thermal comfort. So like I mentioned, indoor heat is a major issue in the community. So residents believe that expanding access to cooling system is a primary means to minimize indoor heat exposure. So what does this mean? So this means upgrading inefficient cooling system of the old housing units and prioritizing design retrofits that provides cooling in place. And some of the actions that were identified were providing AC by landlord, like, how we do it for heat, and creating like common spaces or emergency spaces for cooling or any kind of spaces for like emergencies. And the second one, which I'll talk today, is minimizing physical isolation. And like I said, many of my participants were in the top floor. So minimizing physical isolation should include increasing accessibility to the outdoor environment, in both indoor and outdoor environment, and reducing physical barriers that locks them in their residence, and maximizing safety in their home. And this means making sure that building facilities are ACE and disabled friendly, elevators are working, there are handrails available for the support in the stairs, making stairs less steep and slippery. And these are the basic things they are demanding here. And if there is no elevators in the building, ensuring that lower floor units are available to the elderly. And finally, after documenting all the planning actions and strategies, these were ranked by the community in a focus group based on their relative importance. Again, I've just included those which were ranked highest with respective policy theme. Some of the highly preferred decision actions were categorizing AC as a required amenity to be provided by the landlord and ensuring ACE-friendly spaces. It's interesting to observe that though residents identified financial constraint of using AC, this planning action was comparatively lower ranked. And this might be due to the fact that residents have to pay much higher heating bills during the winter time compared to the cooling cost. And summer used to be this month where the saving month, where they save some amount of money. But now, as extreme heat is becoming more frequent and intense, their cooling costs are rising exponentially. And many of their frustration was due to how energy efficient this housing were, and also using of this inefficient small AC unit that was not cooling down the whole space. So they have to use, and because of that, they have to use AC for the really long time. So then this research in Dorchester, I extended it to second largest community, environment justice community, Roxbury, which is a historic Black neighborhood, where Dr. Wig and I, in partnership with Urban Planning Department with Boston Planning and Development Agency and Boston Public School, initiated this summer program in urban planning. And for our pilot year, which is summer of 2022, we worked with youth of color, one of the most unused resource in climate resiliency planning. And in 2022, we worked with 15 youth of color. And this past summer, we had 27. And both of this year, we work in an extreme heat research project to understand the nature, extent, and impact of extreme heat and the potential solution to manage urban heat in the Lower Roxbury neighborhood. This summer program is for 4 weeks, and it's an intensive hands-on research where students were involved in range of activity. And the maps here I have shown here is one of the research activity that they did, which is called temperature sensing. So they went out in a neighborhood with a handheld temperature sensor, and then they collected temperature in the different locations of Lower Roxbury. The map on the left is 2022 summer, and in the right is this year. And we found that both of the year, we found that many locations of Lower Roxbury are at least 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the weather station data. So basically, yes, Roxbury is urban heat island. During second week, student went out and interviewed residents around the neighborhood in the busy hubs like transit station to understand how people were experiencing extreme heat in Roxbury, and data validated that increasing extreme heat around Roxbury is a concern, and residents are deeply impacted by this. And after working for 4 weeks with a range of activities like understanding neighborhood history, how heat affects residents, doing temperature sensing, identifying hottest spot in the neighborhood, best practices research, by involving in all of these activities, students created this preliminary strategy to address the heat issues in the area. So this Cool Roxbury plan on the left side of the slide is the report of 2022 summer, and which won Best Student Project Award by American Planning Association Massachusetts chapter. We are currently in the process of finalizing 2023 report, which includes extreme heat research and one of the applied urban design project, where student created design for Cool Pocket Park, which I didn't talk about today much. I just focus on the extreme heat, but this year we had 2 different projects. One is extreme heat, one is urban design, and I'm happy to talk about in the question and answer session about both of the project. So this extension of research generated tons of good data, validated my research and findings of Dorchester. And as I reflect both of this research that I've worked in this last five years, it started with this one small group, one organization with the values of community-based participatory research, and how now it's turning into a participatory action research where 20 plus institutions at different level are being involved. And now we have one international nonprofit, 100 Resilient Cities Network, who are already working with us, and they will be continuing to work with us for next year as well. The urban design project, which I touched on, is implementation work that around heat mitigation in Roxbury that We work in 2023 summer. And we have another local school funding for the implementation work around, again, heat mitigation. This is the school, private charter school, I believe. Yes, private charter school who would be working with us in 2024. We have got amazing response. Like I mentioned, we got Best Student Project Award from the American Planning Association. We were invited, our students actually went into different forums across the city of Boston and beyond to talk about their finding, to talk about the summer school itself. And for me, most important thing here is like how residents' voice, needs, and concerns are getting amplified by their own youth of color from their own community, and it is generating result. The master plan of Roxbury done by Boston Planning and Development Agency are being amended based on the findings provided by 2022 summer program report. And now we have some of the findings from 2023 summer program, and BPTA is now working with us on that and how they can include in master plan of Roxbury as well. So, all this to say is like now, as climate change is becoming reality, this kind of work can be a pathway, hopefully, to breeze skepticism that residents have, many marginalized communities have for academia, which is well known for the extractive research, and including like planning agencies and other city planning city agencies, right? So hopefully, like it will pave a path towards like more partnership, healthy partnership between community, city, and planning agencies in the future. I'll end my presentation here. These are the funding that made possible both of this research work. Summer program 2022 Cool Roxbury plan is available in this website. I can forward this link, including this slide, which I talked today. For the 2023 summer program report, we're still finalizing it. If you want to get a copy of it, please email me. I'll make sure that you are included in the list when we first sent out our report to public. Yeah, I'll end this here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and I'll open this for the questions. Thank you.
Has the planning agency in Boston thought about, I'm sure they have, like planting more trees or green roofing in order to kind of make it cooler? I mean, any other strategies?
Okay, sorry, I cannot hear the question. Maybe like I missed the first part of the question. Can you repeat that again?
A number of different studies. I know in Brazil, some of the cities, they found that, in areas where there's greater poverty, there's less ground cover, there's less trees, there's less greenery. It seemed when on your map it showed something similar. Is the city doing anything about planting more greenery, or maybe using green living roofing materials? I know that's been a strategy in many European cities. Well,
yes, I mean, City of Boston doing a lot of work in different silos of heat management. Say it like, planting trees, there is an urban forestry plan, there is a green space, there is an open space plan. There is so much going on, but it was not tied into this, heat response and management efforts as per se. It was like going in a very siloed direction. And also like how much of all of this plan is happening, or like, there is not an evaluation that is happening, like how much we have achieved in terms of greening or open space. And now like there is like more concern about green gentrification as well. Like so much thing is happening there. For the cool roof and green roof, there is a study going on in City of Boston to understand like, whether, because it really depends, like it's a contextual process, right? Like the green roof or cool roof might work in some area, but not in all. But there is some studies going on from Boston University, I believe, about that as well. There is all this to say is that there is lots happening on the ground, but how it's going to tie it up into a one specific, like, heat mitigation and adaptation effort is a different story. And right now, like I mentioned, City of Boston do have the first comprehensive plan for the heat. So hopefully like it will tie down all the efforts that has been going on for many years now into some like concrete effort.
But it's not as rapid. I mean, to plant trees, to plant green roofs takes a while to actually have an outcome versus more problems that come with the heat, especially for the elderly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, mitigation effort is different, but what about the adaptation response, right? Like you said, trees takes much longer time. So while trees are doing their job, like, you know, how we are going to make sure that the most vulnerable residents, which are already being impacted by heat, what are we doing on the ground to safeguard? And just like giving cooling centers is not enough, because like I mentioned, many of my residents didn't have any idea about cooling centers. And even they are elderly people, like how they are going to commute from one direction to another. Yeah.
I'm online. Hi. Thank you so much. This is so interesting. I worked in a climate services organization, and this is exactly the kind of work I think that, you know, when you think about kind of actionable science and actionable information. So I really appreciate what you've been doing. I was curious in a couple of things. I definitely think the issue of communication is a problem, just I think everywhere. I know that Gainesville has strategies where, you know, if you're below a certain income threshold, or if your house over a certain age, you can apply and receive you know, essentially free weatherizing that would help lower your energy bill, increase efficiency. But you know, when you also balance that with people that are elderly, and you imagine the sort of paperwork involved, I don't know whether there are just sort of these barriers that to some of this that go beyond just the lack of knowledge of them, but also just how do you like get through the process of doing that. And the other question, I think it's a question, oh yeah, is just, you know, when you talk to your people, did you ever talk about what they felt like solutions to them might look like in terms of keeping them cool?
Yes. So the first part of this about this how we address this communication gap, right? About the services that City of Boston is already provided, or like any city is already providing to the residents. There are many problems there. First, like, you know, city cannot expect that all the residents to know all the resources out there. And there are many resources out there, even for a person like me, who I believe is really good at like finding information in the web. To find information about that subsidy of electricity was painful. And these are immigrants, many of their English is not their first language, and to even understand, okay, these are the information out there, I need to fill these forms. Many of the residents did actually, you know, said to me that how I'm going to fill all these like 20 pages of form, like so much of information, and I don't know how to keep track of this. And that's why like many of those people who knew about it, they were like, oh, I'm not going to give my information to these folks, you know. So there is sort of like, there is a trust issue, there is so much of work that needs to be done, mainly to addressing concern about elderly immigrant women. And regarding the solution, like second part of the research, which I talked about, where actually I asked residents like, okay, so what can City of Boston do about some of the concern that you have highlighted? They did mention a lot about how this information can be, you know, transferred to them in a more effective way. Maybe like some of the examples being, why can't City of Boston, you know, give all of this information to the organization these residents work with? For example, churches, like, you know, they do go to their church every Sunday. Food pantries, you know, why can't, like, you know, this information be amplified via these organizations? And I believe City of Boston is doing to some extent. But what I've noticed in City of Boston is like these information are channeled to this like specific organizations, who may not be in contact with marginalized residents, because not all, for example, there is like specific task force that City of Boston has created. And I wonder how many of these organizations working in this task force actually represent intermediary organizations who are working in this residence. So all this to say is like, yes, residents have identified specific solutions or specific actions residents, City of Boston can do, which is documented in my research.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Alan, will you talk about how the youth wanted to be climate ambassadors?
Sorry, Ellen, what was that?
Teenagers wanted to be they wanted to get jobs as climate ambassadors.
Our student of summer program?
As a way, I can talk about it. So students want to be the high schoolers wanted to get work for the city as ambassadors for their neighborhoods, right? These are all students of color, and they wanted from these neighborhoods that are typically underserved by government. And they wanted to be the link that would provide the information and get a job experience they could put on their resume and get a paycheck. I thought that was an interesting finding too. It hasn't happened yet. It's very interesting, actually. Yeah, the city was positive. Absolutely. Questions?
So thank you again for the talk. You mentioned the problem of green gentrification. So what can urban planners do to kind of walk that fine line between, improving the livability of the space on the one hand versus like driving up, property values and rents and things like that? I mean, are there solutions to that conundrum?
Oh, that's another talk, and a really interesting talk. And to be really honest, I don't have an answer to that, because when I started talking with community leaders before actually talking with residents, there were like some concern about green gentrification and what's happening in East Boston, which is another environment justice community in Boston. And what happened to that community after like all these open space and recreation plan and urban forestry plan was announced, and there is like whole different story going on there, and they were really scared that Dorchester and Roxbury will again walk in the same path, and how residents are already being displaced with high rising rents and with all of these plans and programs being implemented without being consulted with community. That's going to generate like whole range of issue. I don't have answer to that because that's not my expertise, and I don't want to be here talking about that. But yeah, that's something I think some of the scholarship do talk about, and I believe like there is many research that's happening in City of Boston which talks about green gentrification, how urban planners can balance both of those. But I don't know much about that, so sorry.
Thank you.
I was wondering about, sorry.
Behind you, there's
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all good. So I actually did my undergrad at the University of Richmond, and Richmond's been dealing a lot with these very similar issues of heat urban islands. And you had your students doing out and studying the temperature specifically. I know that Boston is significantly larger land-wise than Richmond, but were you able to actually check any other communities? So when you put about 5 maps, different neighborhoods. Are you able to do any kind of temperature comparison? Because if there's one community where they're having higher temperatures than what's being reported, is that just a citywide issue, or is it specifically neighborhoods that are dealing with redlining and this historical economic discrimination?
For our project, we just focus on one neighborhood. We didn't do comparison to other neighborhood in general, because our summer program was focused on one specific neighborhood. But City of Boston, maybe I think it's Museum of Science who did this urban heat island mapping a couple of years ago, and they did find out that red line neighborhood versus non-red line neighborhood, there was a huge temperature difference, and I think it was up to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. So those studies are already available in heat resiliency study that was done by City of Boston. We didn't focus on other neighborhood, and moving forward, hopefully like 2024, hopefully we'll be able to expand it in other environment justice communities like Chinatown, and Chinatown is one of the, I think, top urban heat island in City of Boston, and then Dorchester and Roxbury. So hopefully we can do such kind of comparison. For our research program, we didn't do the comparison. We just did comparison between our neighborhood versus weather station data and how there was a temperature difference up to 10 degree Fahrenheit, 10 to 15 degree Fahrenheit.
I was just wondering if there were examples elsewhere, whether in the United States or in Europe, that you're familiar with, in which city and urban planning professionals and agencies were more engaged in the heat mitigation and response strategies that cities were coming up with. And if there are examples like that that you're aware of, how do their approaches differ from what you're seeing in Boston and elsewhere where it's being more driven by public health?
Oh yeah, so there are some of the examples like in European cities after 2003 heat wave, there has been many efforts to address like heat wave, both adaptation and mitigation, and both goes hand in hand. There has been like concrete examples, and I think that's where like City of Boston has been also borrowing some of the best practices from. There are some of the best practices in India as well, in South Asia. And right now in South Asia, again, like heat wave action plan has been the biggest concern, and many of the mitigation and adaptation efforts are going on. I think the difference, I'll say, between City of Boston and other areas are mainly in how City of Boston has done really comprehensive understanding of heat and other disaster, and they have been now aggressively doing implementation of these strategies, and now also like thinking more of a like community-based approach. They have been really really advocating all like in different forms in a really comprehensive way. In Europe, yes, like their heat action plan and strategies has been recognized as, I don't know if I can use this word best, but I do believe that the community-based approach is not as intensive as in Boston. And I feel, I think I'll just stop there. Like, I mean, there are some like similarities and differences. And just to talk about the heat planning is emerging field, to be really honest. And like many cities and many communities across the world are learning from each other. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
Does the city of Boston have rental inspections or minimum criteria for energy efficiency?
Yes, in papers, yes. But how much that applies in practice, no. One of the things really interesting about the City of Boston, and I don't know if it's similar to other cities as well, is like in papers, like they have everything. But, you know, in practice, like, I don't think so. Like there is regular inspection about energy efficiency. And I going back to one of the comment that, you know, there is some like, you know, subsidy or some program that provides free weatherization to this housing. Many of these residents are renters, so they do not have right to do all the weatherization, you know, activities without getting permission from their landlords, right? So, yeah, I mean, there is no proper inspection at all. Like for the basic things like, you know, having accessible building, I mean, there is nothing there which is being implemented. But in papers, yes, it's absolutely.
Check out the utility bills before you commit in Gainesville, and I'm sure in Boston too.
The last questions or comments for Johnny. Johnny, you just finished your PhD. There's a lot of PhD and grad and master students here. Any advice? Anything you'd like to give?
Don't say anything bad about Alan.
No, just hang in there. Just hang in there and you'll get through that finish line and it'll be amazing.
Thank you, Sajani, for virtually coming to Gainesville today. We hope to welcome you in person at some point soon. And good luck starting the postdoc at Minnesota.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. It was nice to be here.